The Keeper of Flocks by Alberto Caeiro, with an introduction by Ricardo Reis, both of whom are actually heteronyms for the great and one and only Fernando Pessoa. Note: if the critic will apply himself to a careful analysis of these apparently very simple poems, he will find himself again and again faced with unexpected and increasingly complex elements, taking for axiomatic what immediately impresses him, the naturalness and spontaneity of Caeiro's poems. He will be surprised to find that they are at the same time rigorously unified by a thinking which not only coordinates and links them, but which also foresees objections, anticipates criticism, and explains away flaws by integrating these flaws into the spiritual substance of the work, though we think of Caeiro as an objective poet, as indeed he is. In 4 of his poems we find him expressing entirely subjective emotions, but we are not allowed the cruel satisfaction of pointing out his error. In the poem preceding these poems, he explains that they were written during an illness, and therefore they must be different from his other poems, because sickness is not health. The critic is unable to raise to his lips the cup of his cruel satisfaction. When he seeks the slightly less concrete pleasure of ferreting out transgressions against the work's own inner theory, he is confronted by poems like Number blank and blank, where his objections have already been raised and his questions answered. Only someone who reads this work patiently and with readiness of spirit can appraise what is surprising about Caeiro's foresight and his intellectual coherence. His coherence is, in fact, more intellectual than sentimental or emotional. Caeiro's work is truly a manifestation of a pagan mind, the order and discipline of paganism which Christianity caused us to lose. The reasoned intelligence of things, which was paganism's most obvious attribute, and no longer ours, permeate his work, because it speaks here, its form. We see the essence, not the exterior shape of paganism. In other words, I do not see Caeiro reconstructing the exterior form of paganism. Paganism's very substance has, in fact, been summoned up from Avernus, as Orpheus summoned Eurydice, by the harmonic magic of Caeiro's emotion. What are, by my own criterion, the faults of his work? Only 2, and they do little to dim the brightness of this brother of the gods. Caeiro's poems lack the one thing that would complete them. There is no exterior discipline to match the strength, coherency, and order reigning in the heart of his work. He chose, as will be seen, a poetic form which, though strongly personal, as it could not fail to be, is merely the free verse of the moderns. He did not control his writing with an overarching discipline comparable to the discipline with which he nearly always controls his emotion, with which he always controls his ideas. We may forgive this flaw because we must forgive much in innovators, but we must not omit saying that it is a flaw and not a distinction. Neither did he fully control the sick emotion, still slightly demi-Christian, out of which his poet soul rose into the world. His ideas, always essentially pagan, are sometimes cloaked in ill-fitting emotive garb. In The Keeper of the Flocks, one can follow a gradual perfection taking place. The final poems, especially the 4 or 5 preceding the last 2, are perfectly unified in idea and emotion. I would forgive the poet for remaining burdened by certain sentimental accoutrements of Christian mentality if he had never, even at the end of his work, succeeded in ridding himself of that baggage. But since at a certain point in his poetic evolution he did succeed, I do chastise him, and I severely chastise him, as I severely chastised him in person, for not returning to his earlier poems and adjusting them to his acquired discipline. If he had been unable to subject any of them to this discipline, he should have crossed them out entirely. But the courage to sacrifice is a trait seldom found in poets. It is so much more difficult to remake than it is to make for the first time. Truly, contrary to the old saying, the last step is the hardest. And so, I find the poem so irritating to a Christian, to be absolutely deplorable for an objective poet in the process of reconstructing the essence of paganism. In this poem, he descends to the utter nadir of Christian subjectivism, even as deep as that admixture of the objective and the subjective which forms the characteristic malady of the moderns. From certain pages in the intolerable work of the ill-named Victor Hugo to the near totality of the amorphous magma which sometimes passes for poetry among our contemporary mystics. Perhaps I have exaggerated, perhaps I have abused, having benefited from the resurrection of paganism achieved by Caeiro, and having, as all beneficiaries do, busied myself with the easy secondary art of development. It is probably ungrateful of me to rail against the defects inherent in the innovation from which I have so benefited. But where I find defects, even if I forgive them, I must name them as such. Magis amica veritas. Ricardo Reis. 1. I've never kept flocks, but it's like I've kept them. My soul is like a shepherd. It knows the wind and the sun, and it walks hand in hand with the seasons, following and seeing all the peace of nature without people, comes and sits at my side. But I get sad, as the sunset is in our imagination when it gets cold in the plain and you feel night coming in like a butterfly through the window. But my sadness is quiet because it's natural and it's just. And it's what should be in my soul when it already thinks it exists, and my hands pick flowers and my soul doesn't know it. Like the sound of cowbells beyond the curve of the road, all my thoughts are peaceful. I'm just sorry about knowing they're peaceful, because if I didn't know it, instead of them being peaceful and sad, they'd be happy and peaceful. Thinking makes you uncomfortable, like walking in the rain, when the wind gets stronger and it seems to rain more. I don't have ambitions or desires. Being a poet isn't my ambition. It's my way of being alone. And sometimes, if I want to imagine I'm a lamb, or a whole flock spreading out all over the hillside, so I can be a lot of happy things at the same time, it's only because I feel what I write at sunset, or when a cloud passes its hand over the light, and silence runs over the grass outside. When I sit and write poems, or walking along the roads or pathways, I write poems on the paper in my thoughts. I feel a staff in my hand, and I see my silhouette on top of a knoll, looking after my flock, and seeing my ideas, or looking after my ideas and seeing my flock, with a silly smile like someone who doesn't understand what somebody's saying, but tries to pretend they do. I greet everyone who reads me. I tip my wide hat to them when they see me at my door, just as the stagecoach comes to the top of my hill. I greet them and wish them sunshine, or rain when rain is needed, and that their houses have a favorite chair where they sit reading my poems by an open window. And when they read my poems, I hope they think I'm something natural, an ancient tree, for instance, where they sat down with a thump in the shade when they were kids, tired from playing, and wiped the sweat from their hot brows with the sleeve of their striped cotton smock. 2. When I look, I see clear as a sunflower. I'm always walking on the roads, looking right and left, and sometimes looking behind. And what I see every second is something I've never seen before. And I know how to do this very well. I know how to have the essential astonishment that a child would have if it could really see it was being born when it was being born. I feel myself being born in each moment, in the eternal newness of the world. I believe in the world like I believe in a marigold, because I see it. But I don't think about it, because to think is to not understand. The world wasn't made for us to think about. To think is to be sick in the eyes, but for us to see and agree with. I don't have a philosophy. I have senses. If I talk about nature, it's not because I know what it is, but because I love it. And that's why I love it. Because when you love, you never know what you love, or why you love, or what love is. Loving is eternal innocence, and the only innocence is not thinking. 3. In the evening, leaning out my window, watching the fields out from in the corner of my eye, I read Cesario Verde's book until my eyes were burning. I felt so sorry for him. He was like a man from the country, and he walked through the city like he was out on bail. But the way he looked at houses, and the way he saw the streets, and the way he had of taking things in, was like someone looking at trees, or lowering their eyes to the road where they go walking, or taking in the flowers in the fields. That's why he had that great sadness he could never really say he had, but walked in the city like someone walking in the country, sad, like pressing flowers in books and putting plants in jars. 4. This afternoon, a thunderstorm fell down from the sky onto the hillsides, like a huge pile of gravel, like someone shaking a tablecloth out of a high window. And all the scraps falling together make some noise when they fall. The hissing rain rained from the sky and darkened the roads. When lightning flashes in the air and space shakes like a big head saying no, I don't know why, I'm not scared. I stopped praying to St. Barbara like I was somebody's old aunt. It's that praying to St. Barbara makes me feel even more simple than I think I am. I feel homey and domestic, like I've gone through life tranquilly, like the wall of my garden, having ideas and sentiments like a flower has perfume and color. It makes me feel like someone who can believe in St. Barbara. To be able to believe in St. Barbara. Someone believes there's a St. Barbara. Someone has to believe she's a person you can see, or else how could they even conceive of her? This is silly. What do flowers, trees, and flocks know about St. Barbara? If a branch of a tree could think, it would never construe saints or angels. It would believe that the sun is God and a thunderstorm is an angry bunch of people above us. How the simplest of men are sick and confused and stupid, next to the clear simplicity and health in existing of trees and plants. And me, thinking about all this, I became less happy again. I became somber and sickened and gloomy, like when a thunderstorm threatens all day, and even by night, it doesn't come.